So, hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Sukriti Verma, the co-founder of Shift Eco. Shift Eco is a platform that is dedicated towards building, sustainable habits amongst consumers and office spaces. We are a 3+ year old business, and from the very beginning, our aim, we are also very dedicated to build this community of conscious consumers, bring together consumers and businesses that are impact driven. And we focus very heavily on learning as well because, the space is very new to a lot of us. And this is where we debunk various myths, discuss facts, challenges, and deep dive into various topics of sustainability. So today I welcome Mr. Ram Chaitanya, and with him we're going to be discussing and decoding sustainable fashion. Ram is the founder of EcoVisor, which is a web platform focused on educating consumers to making more sustainable choices. And he also works with various brands to communicate their sustainability practices um, through a third party verified credible manner. Prior to EcoVisor, Ram has worked in Google and Danaher in various roles and also practiced organic farming. So he holds an MBA from INSEAD, and I leave it to you, Ram, to give a little bit of introduction to yourself as well.
Okay. Thanks a lot for having me here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation and sharing and learning from you as well. And so, hello everyone, excited to be here today. This is sustainability is something that I'm deeply passionate about, and always trying to see how to educate and support people whoever are trying to transition to living more sustainably. And looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Great. So my first question to you, Ram, is what are these key principles and goals of sustainable fashion? How do they differ from, your traditional fashion practices? What should, one keep in mind in that regard?
Got it. So maybe I'll first start with like generally how mostly fashion industry currently operates, and then we'll get into what sustainable fashion might look like. So right now we see that a lot of fashion practices, if you broadly break it down different buckets like environment factors or like worker well-being practices or in terms of like animal welfare, right? In terms of environment, you see that a lot of pollutants are released into because of the dyeing practices or the materials that they're using. And similarly, a lot of water usage that's involved. Similarly, there's also a lot of waste that gets generated. And due to all of this, there's also a lot of carbon emissions. Globally, the fashion industry contributes roughly between 6 to 8% of the total emissions. So quite a substantial number just for one particular industry.
Right.
And this is happened largely because what happens with fashion, fast fashion brands, every couple of weeks or so, they keep launching a new series, new collection. Whereas in the past, it would be maybe like at most 3, 4 times a year. And because of this, you see people like the quality of garments is poor. And so they don't last very long. And people keep buying and they don't use it. On average, 50, 60 garments are bought every year in like Western countries. And most of them are not even used even once, and they just go to landfills. So this is some of the major issues with the fast fashion industry. And what sustainable fashion would entail is more on the lines of one, the materials you use. You either use organic or low impact materials which have lower carbon emissions. And similarly, like the dyes that you use are not polluting the water or creating waste. Then apart from this, in terms of worker well-being, making sure you're paying fair wages to the workers, having good worker conditions. And if you're using any animal products, like responsibly sourcing like either the leather or wool. So these are broadly some of the principles that you will take. So the crux of it is that you are not, you're producing in a way which is not creating waste, and you can reuse or recycle any of these materials. So that's broadly.
Right. No, I agree with you, Ram. I think I mean, in recent times, there are a lot of, various Chinese companies that have come in that are,
Right.
throwing out these garments at very low rates
Good
and
prices.
competitive rates.
Yes.
And I have begun to see a lot of your regular fashion brands that, we've been using in the past also coming up with collections with, materials that are not great anymore to be able to
Right.
service the market at a competitive price. So I do see this shift happening in one sense where, of course, they're using a lot of cheaper materials, but then there is also a section within the same brand where they're trying to use sustainable materials. Um, and there has been a lot of conversation in that space because there's a lot of greenwashing that happens. With various concepts. So, what are the key factors that people should look out for when they're purchasing a garment?
So yeah, as you said, it's very hard for anyone, even us. Like we have proper like a sustained masters and PhDs in research, and for them also they have to dig a lot deep into like understanding whether what this brand does is really sustainable or it's not. So somebody who is not really aware of like studied all of this, it's overwhelming. And because any brand can write eco-friendly or yeah, environment say organic or whatever, but and have no facts to back their claims, right? So I think the most important thing a consumer can probably do to prevent this greenwashing or how to do the deal is uh, simplest thing is probably look for be educated about some of the high quality certifications. Like for example, organic cotton, there's something called GOTS, which is reliable. But again, not all certifications are equal. There's also something called Better Cotton, BCI, Better Cotton Initiative, which is not as reliable as GOTS when it comes to their standards and all. So this is just looking at the right certification and a simple way to look at which brand are they like making anything. And also like the thing is that different types of certification, like GOTS is only for the organic cotton material, right? Whereas dyeing they have other things like blue sign.
Right.
Then in terms of worker conditions, there's like fair trade. So
Yes.
you need to one just spend like a few minutes to just be aware of what are some of the general standards that are there. So that is one way to be educated. If someone is really enthusiastic about being aware of like supporting some brand, because not some of the smaller brands they may not have these certifications, but if someone really wants to like feels like they're maybe have a chat with them to like and if suppose also one more thing about sustainability is like going local if you can like in India if you see there are a lot of uh, local stores that are coming where they're sourcing material from the same region, making it in the same city. So maybe visiting their thing to see how the workers are treated, what materials they use. So that way you also get educated. So
Right.
that's another way where it's also like an experience instead of like just pressing a button, and getting something online. It's also like if you have kids, take them out, let them also understand of they have workshops. A lot of people also have workshops where they educate people because most people are not aware like how their shopping is impacting the environment or the world at large negatively. So I think
Right.
starting off with certification is a simple way of doing. And also like if suppose you're not seeing message that brand, if you really like that brand, like hey, I like you claim to be sustainable or eco-friendly. Can you share any specific claims?
Right.
I think calling out brands and asking them for claims, I think that is one of the best ways. You can also hold brands responsible.
Absolutely, absolutely agree with you on that. But Ram, in terms of materials, like there are so many sustainable materials now. There's
Right,
organic cotton, there's hemp, there is
right.
rPET, which has its own controversy. So, which materials, according to you, that are available in fashion are most, if you could, sustainable? Is there like, a preference in what is more
Right,
sustainable, what is the least
right, right,
sustainable?
right. Yeah, so in terms of materials, so one is like they are more sustainable, but also availability. For example, like hemp is more sustainable than cotton, for example, but
Right.
availability of it is like a lot less. And the other challenge that when I talk to people why they don't buy hemp is the price points. They
Yes.
tend to be much more expensive. Hemp tends to be more expensive than cotton. So like generally like hemp or linen, right? These tend to be generally better uh, from a sustainability angle versus cotton because cotton uses a lot of water. So
Right.
that is something to keep in mind. now there are also like newer materials that are coming out, but still like these haven't yet reached like large scale adoption as of now because they're still working on the unit economics, like banana tex
Yes.
made of banana fibers, and there's also like bamboo is another thing, but bamboo has its own issues in terms of from a sustainability angle or from and also like other toxic stuff that you probably have to use to get some of the bamboo fibers. So it's still a bit of a work in progress, but uh, the best things I would say probably like closer to hemp or like linen, which is also like a little more widely available, especially something like linen. But the price points are a bit of
Right.
an issue, and that's why people generally focus on cotton because it's slightly more affordable than compared to some of these other brands. You
Right.
see a lot of these newer fibers being shown by most of the higher end like boutique brands because they are focused on luxury segments, so like banana fibers and others. So that's where we see most of this adoption.
Right. And what about recycled cotton? Is that, a sustainable material? Is that still utilizing a lot of energy?
Actually, yeah, like recycled materials are very helpful. Like you also see a lot of recycled polyester and all that, but
Yeah.
that has its own share of problems because it releases microplastics and everything. Recycled cotton is far superior. See, as a best practice, if you can, like just reuse materials. The
Mm.
other problem also to note though is recycling, as nice as it sounds, it's not as easy to recycle fabrics and materials. Okay.
Right. Right. And there is this whole controversy on rPET, right? They say that one, of course, you're preventing the plastic from going, to your landfills and oceans. So rPET is a greatly sustainable material. But there's also this conversation of when these plastic bottles, etc., are broken down into, making materials like clothing, it's very hard to recycle them because plastic bottles can be recycled a numerous number of times, but a clothing made of rPET may not may just have to land up in landfills, and it also leaches in the washing cycles. So what is your take on rPET as a material?
So I'm not expert too deeply into rPET,
Right.
but one thing to note though about plastics as such is uh, this whole recycling plastics also. Uh, it's only like less than 10% actually globally gets recycled. Even though we saying that plastic is recyclable, it's not. And also there are so many different grades of plastic. So and generally people if they're trying to also they only pick the high value one because otherwise the economics don't work out. And
Mm.
also not and there are only certain pockets in the world where they're actively thinking about recycling plastic, otherwise it's just ending up in landfills and so this whole thing that like plastic is like you can reuse it and recycle it, so it's okay to use it is not is a misleading sort of assumption. That's what I feel.
No, I agree with you on that. But also, like, why are some of these materials so expensive? Is it because we're not able to achieve, mass production of these, fashion labels yet? Or, what
Right.
are the challenges in this space?
So, I mean, if you just break down into two broad buckets in terms of for any garment, right? Like costs involved, right? One would be materials, and the other would be like worker well-being practices, right?
Yes.
So, if you just take into these two broad buckets, if you are producing something like where you're growing right from the farming practice, you're growing organic cotton.
Mm.
Uh, it costs a little more so to like processing it, right? You're not using like toxic dyes to you're reducing your waste and other practices you're following, and the other thing is you're paying workers fair conditions. All of this, like if suppose you're producing something for $100, right? By default this cost will get inflated just by using these right materials and right labor practices, maybe 30-40%.
Mm.
Okay, so this thing that getting price parity, it's never, if you really try to be honest with it, it's never possible. Like
Yeah.
even if you see garments, right? There are a lot of brands, like maybe 10 years ago and now, you
Mm-hmm.
might get a t-shirt for $10, same shirt that you got, while prices from an inflationary standpoint have doubled. I think we should also be asking ourselves, like, if I bought a piece of t-shirt now for $10, has the person who's grown the cotton or who's like stitched the shirt, have they been paid a fair wage or have they been exploited in the process? And am I using the exploited garment? I think most people are probably never thinking of this, but if you think of these questions, you will see that it is not produced fairly. While and we again the marketing we see is like very fancy and beautiful, so we are never thinking of any of these questions.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think now even all the bigger retail chains, they're all trying to, talk sustainability, but you don't really know what's happening behind the doors because there
Right.
is so much conversation and a lot of these brands where they're doing sustainable collections, but you're not aware of, if they're actually sustainable or not. So, in terms of supporting local businesses, I know that certifications is very difficult for local small run businesses to get because it is an expensive
Expensive.
position.
Yes.
So what do you suggest? What are the kind of certifications, or are there any sort of smaller certifications they can get or put out there? What kind of information they can put out there
Right.
so that they can distinguish themselves from being a
Right.
greenwashed brand?
No, I think this is a great point what you just brought up. I personally also feel like for smaller brands, it doesn't make sense like to spend thousands of dollars to get a certification for across all the different, because each category, as I said, like materials to processing, everything has its own certification. So I've also advised some brands in the past, and the best way to deal with this is like being very transparent. And what I mean by that is like on your website, you can showcase clearly like we just take photos or a video of your manufacturing setup or of the workers and their working conditions, right? That end of the day, your objective is not to get certification. End of the day, is to build trust with consumers. So being transparent, showing all these details to your consumers, I think that's another way. Because as I said in the past also, not everyone is aware of which are the right certifications also. Because what also happens with the certification businesses, if you see certifications, a lot of them, right? If you see are non-profits, and if you see who funds the non-profits, uh, a lot of big corporations, they fund the non-profit through another non-profit. So
Right,
you like unless you dig 2, 3 layers deeper, you will never know this answer.
right.
And because of this, most people are not even aware. Uh, uh, so even certifications as such are not reliable. So that's why I think just being transparent and just showing how you do, I think is a great way to build trust with the target audience.
And that adds a lot of authenticity as well, right?
Yes.
And I think, I mean, as a marketer, what I have seen is that, when you're showing behind the scenes, when you're being very transparent of your entire manufacturing process, going back, showing your workshop maybe on social media, it really highly interests consumers as well. Hello? I think we just,
So I just had some magic. Can you hear me? Okay? Sorry, can you just
yes, I
repeat
can.
last 20 seconds? Your voice was breaking.
Yes. No, I was just mentioning that, as brands, a lot of, smaller businesses are showing behind the scenes, and that's working very well for them because consumers are very interested in knowing what, how, these products have been made and what the authentic story of the brand is.
Right. I think just uh, it's definitely true that a lot of okay, if I specifically think of people who are consciously thinking of searching for sustainable things, a lot of them do at least like a couple of minutes of research of
Right.
figuring out which ones are like actually sustain. Like I mean, basic checks on like something is organic or good or not. All of that they do basically.
Mm-hmm. But do you think the conversation is changing? Do you think consumers are demanding more sustainable brands and, are ready to pay a little more or a lot more, for to make these conscious choices? Do you think that mindset is changing, or is it still a long way to go?
Yeah, I think I would say it's still a long way to go. I mean, there is definitely more awareness now versus like maybe a few years back. I would still think maybe like 1% or less is where people are like seriously thinking. I mean, so when I say seriously thinking now, let's say I give you two options. Uh, one is like probably more sustainably made versus one is less sustainably made. People's willingness to pay like 30, 40% higher or 2x higher is all like it's less than 1%. I mean, again, there are two things to consider here. It's not just willingness of wanting to buy a more responsible product, but it's also ability. Some people, it's also, as they're more expensive, it's probably not feasible also for a lot of people to necessarily buy. But the thing is also people who can afford to, even there, it's like a smaller percentage. I mean, there are a lot of studies where people, like at this Harvard study, it was very popular, where it's like a paradox of the green consumer, where people say, I'm willing to spend more, but when it
Right.
actually say and do, like there's a lot of gap.
That's true. No, and I think we also conducted a research when we started Shift Eco, and the number of consumers who say they're willing to adopt sustainable practice,
Yes,
it was about 91%, whereas people who are doing, even one or two, they have adopted one or two habits was just
right.
about 40% of the people. So there is a large gap in this space where, you want to do better, but you're still not actually making conscious effort to changing certain things around. But also for brands, Ram, like I have seen in my experience a lot of smaller businesses focused on sustainable fashion. They open up super well, but a lot of times they end up shutting down business. What are the challenges that the sustainable fashion industry is facing with regards to materials, pricing, consumer demand, etc.?
Why brands shut down, is that the
There are a lot of brands that
yeah,
are sustainable,
right,
fashion typically, who are facing a lot of
right.
you know problem in sort of building out a strong business.
See, I think I'd also advise some brands, and they've also some of the challenges that they have seen, like a lot of the smaller brands face, is finding the right market who is willing to pay, because almost always these products cost a little more. So finding that right market is tends to be a challenge. Also, something very important to keep in mind, especially when it comes to fashion, if it doesn't look good, however sustainable it is, people will not buy it. So I think if someone is on this call listening to like a sustainable brand or fashion brand owner, making sure that your designs look as good, or if not much better than what the fast fashion or like some of the other high quality, well-known brands do. I think that's very, very important. That's what we've noticed when we've spoken to a lot of the users who are shopping for sustainable fashion. I think that's the number one thing, like making sure the design and aesthetics of the product are really good. Um, and if that's the case, then the same criteria is a lot less than it like maybe with regards to like a mother buying something for a baby. She may care a lot less about like whether it's fancy packaging, more like the ingredients are safer. But where it comes to fashion, like your style is like number one criteria. So making sure that you do that. And because end of the day, what I've noticed with brands that have not like had to shut shop is either their price was very high, or their styles were not distinct, or they didn't position it right. They uh, focus on mass, like reaching out to the general audience, while they're focused on that 1%. So maybe rebranding, like positioning it more as a high end or a luxury brand, like a boutique brand. That's what might have worked better.
But I also noticed like a lot of sustainable fashion brands, I think there is that challenge of, getting bright colors. Like a lot of them are doing very muted, simple colors. Then even in terms of, shapes and cuts, I think with, some of materials like hemp and organic cotton, it's difficult to kind of, there are certain limitations there as well. Is that true?
I think there was someone's first, there's a bit of noise. Can you just repeat what you just said? I think
Hello,
somebody was speaking.
can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, brother.
Yes. So I'm saying that a lot of fashion brands, I mean, a lot of sustainable fashion brands I've seen are using very specific muted color tones, and they're also, in their shape, they're not able to play around too much because probably of the limitation with materials such as organic cotton, etc. Is that true, or is that just, the space that all brands are typically playing?
I think you probably should mute other. I think there's background noise happening. I think others participants. Uh,
On,
I think if I
yes. Yes, I've muted everyone.
So thank you. So your question was again like brands, or just
I'm just saying there are a lot of limitations with
yes,
design that a lot of, sustainable brands have. They do
yes.
very specific type of colors and shapes. So is that a limitation with, because we're using more natural dyes or the materials, or is that just a
Hi.
space that, the category is playing in?
Uh, so okay, okay. That is largely true that most of the brands that you see are use mostly muted colors and all. But there have also been other newer seen like I was also at COP28 and I saw like Stella McCarthy, for example. They had some interesting designs which uh, again made using safer dyes and everything. And so it is possible. It is not very common.
Right.
So but you can definitely have other slightly brighter things as well. There's also innovation in the material space where you're using eco materials and like able to create like more glossier or shinier, little
Right.
more not as muted.
Right.
But again, mainstream, it's going to take some time for all of this sustainable stuff also to come. It's still more like the innovation phase where things are
Yeah.
being figured out.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Also, what about circularity? How can brands promote more circularity within, their operations or even with consumers? Any examples of, uh, such
Okay.
practice?
I'll again highlight one of the biggest brands that does this quite well, like Patagonia. They do try to ensure this to a large extent. And why I've quoted a bigger brand is like most bigger brands, the biggest excuse for why is that, oh, it's very hard for us to do it across the supply chain. Uh, like if suppose there is a trigger that you really want to get it done, I think you can achieve to quite a large extent. So again, if you break down the whole funnel, before it even comes to the consumer, in the manufacturing process itself, can we use one starting with better materials to like minimizing the toxic dyes and other things that we use, which create like pollute the water, and then similar also like the water usage of your products, like especially jeans is a very high water product, so minimizing that in your own manufacturing processes. I think these are some of the things. Then when it comes to uh, the consumer side, right? Even the consumer, when they shop, they should shop for options which is like more like single fibers. Like what happens is that one misleading thing that happens is I might use like recycled polyester and organic cotton in one garment and call it sustainable. And a
Right.
consumer will not be aware, but recycling that is like it's very hard for it to ever happen. It's like separating out fibers is not like technically like you can do it, but it's not going to happen. Like just the amount of resources required to do that. So the consumer also needs to be aware. So they also ask like, hey, you're saying sustainable, but you're mixing fabrics, and so it's not a thing. So consumer also asking these questions another way to like make the brands more responsible. And but one more challenge I see on the consumer side is like in India, for example, you might have a bin for like this wet waste or dry waste or like so sorting, but again it gets mixed up when it goes to the dumping ground. So the segregation and actually implementation of like the thing is again like a challenge. So uh, the number one thing to actually really do is like if you don't need something, think twice when you buy something. Is it really something you need, or is it that you just saw the shiny shirt and you feel like I want it? And so just thinking about that is, I think, the number one thing. And then like brands can do this multiple things to improve their manufacturing practices, and consumers choosing more of like singular fibers, and also uh, and now there are some recycling options that some brands do. So take back program and repair program.
Mm.
So these things supporting mostly and buying from those brands is another thing you can do.
No, absolutely. And I think now, I mean, I don't know if in India this has come up, but there are a lot of thrift shops that have come
Yeah.
up here in the UAE where you can, um, give garments that you're not using a new life, and also, purchase from there at very marginal costs.
Yeah, I think thrifting is another great option. I think it's picked up a lot in US, Europe, and all, especially. But India, some pockets here and there. But I think psychologically, people are, especially if people are well off, that
Yes.
psychologically they still feel like old clothes are not for me. It's like from a maid or that sort of. It's getting better, I think there is some adoption, but again, it's in that small 1% of the population. I think that is a very relevant solution as well, like thrifting, especially like in India and other large populated countries.
No, absolutely. And I think back in the day, as children, we've all grown up, wearing hand-me-downs, etc. And that doesn't happen anymore. I don't see us, giving our used clothes to even our close friends and relatives ahead, and their children. I don't see that
Right.
happening much now.
No, no, not really.
Yeah, yeah. So also, Ram, any, successful case studies or examples of brands that have transitioned to a more sustainable practice that has worked for them? Any, lessons that we can learn from them?
Yeah, I think one of the best things to do is like if you are a brand that is trying to be more sustainable, um, uh, I think first talk to again like the biggest thing playing in people's head is like what will happen to my profitability, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and if you're a public company, you don't have a choice. You are held responsible by stakeholders. Otherwise, as a CEO, you'll be fired. Right? So that is something. So I think starting off with first, like talking to your target, your customers, like okay, in sustainability, what are the things that you usually look for, right? So maybe they say that I think of materials, or I want to make sure that the worker is paid fair because a lot of people are actually aware, like when they think of sustainable fashion, of the bad working conditions.
yes.
So whereas they may not as much think about the mixed fibers and all of these things. So maybe start off with like working on one of those parameters, which is most important, and genuinely doing it, like, and providing transparency to your consumers that yes, let's say you pick improving worker conditions, that yeah, you increase wages by 40%, which is the like fair wages standard it meets, and that the worker conditions that they're working in factory conditions are improved, and providing proof of all those for all your factories, not just one factory, and saying so there's also this other greenwashing aspect where you do one small part and say you're doing everywhere. So being very transparent and like if you're doing only for 70%, just say you're doing 70%. There's a band like there are actually some brands who are being vocal. There's a band called Panga, like I'll probably send it in the chat so people can also explore it. Uh, where they claim like, okay, we're doing well in like these 2, 3 aspects, but 1, 2 aspects we're still working on improving. So I think just being transparent is another way to build trust.
No, I agree with you. I think it's a great practice. I mean, to be honest and, say that, okay, these are our challenges and we're working on them. So it's good to even highlight that as well. That's a great one. Also, any, emerging trends in the sustainable fashion space in terms of materials or anything else that you see are upcoming, maybe in the international market, and that, we can get some inspiration from.
I think again, last few years there've been so many different innovations. Even I think we were at COP, we were seeing like the fashion show, and they showed so many different materials. Uh, the other big thing to note though is like still don't see anything that's been like a large scale sort of adoption. Like you see like coconut leather and like
Practice level.
banana, so
Yeah.
many all sorts of things. And if you've seen coconut leather, it feels like it doesn't feel bad. It's very comfortable, like if you
Yeah.
feel the fabric as such. So there have definitely been innovations, and but again, the price points are still where it's
Mm.
still significantly higher. Probably few more years before we get to a point where there might be a larger adoption. The other thing is also, it's also like lot of lobbying that you see where like, some of these newer innovations, they don't see the light of day because a lot of people tend to lose out by like if these newer things take over. So there's
Yeah.
also like that sort of conflict that is there, which is not spoken about as much.
True. And what is your take on vegan leather? I mean, a lot of brands are, uh,
Right.
using this material, but again, by the end of the day, it is PU and plastics.
Correct. No, this is a great point. And I always cringe when people say, when I ask them, when you say vegan leather, what are you? No, we use PU. And it's like, no animals are hurt in the world. It's very misleading because it's plastic end of the day. And so now again, there are also other brands which, when they say vegan leather, actually like using like coconut leather or other plant-based material, which is fine, which is vegan leather is fine. But yeah, this PU is is actually very misleading. And PU, this is a very clever marketing tactic. Before, about 10-15 years back, it was sold as PU only. Now it is marketed as a vegan leather and like cruelty free and all this, which is misleading actually. I mean, it's harming in its own way. And
Yeah.
so that's something people should be aware of. And like, again, when you're shopping and someone says vegan leather, call out that brand if they're selling PU. Like, ask them, like, are you not? Isn't this bad for the environment while you're using plastic? And if you see what happens to the plastic, either it ends up landfill or in the oceans, and oceans definitely impacting marine life. So you are indirectly harming life in some way or the other.
Absolutely agree with you on that. And what about like recycling? Are there specific companies who are only catering to, say, fashion garments, or should they be going to, any regular facilities and they're able to sort it and recycle garments in specific? Or do they have to go to like specific facilities that are only focusing on, clothing?
No, I think recycling they can go for different materials. It doesn't have to be purely a garment. If it's just, like, but there will be types of material type of recycling, like plastic, like polyester. There will be specialized sort of unit. Whereas cotton, there'll be a different. So there'll be different type for different depending on the material. It'll vary. Uh, Now, again, I'm not sure people on this call which parts of the world, because it'll vary from place to place and where the locations of these units are. But brands, there are a handful of brands that do like take back programs where they take your old stuff. Um, but generally, the preference would be to like repair your garment if you can and reuse it versus like
Yeah,
uh, send it
exactly.
for recycling. If
No, I
that's
absolutely agree with you. I think the 5 hours come in play here, where you have to, the most important thing
yes.
is to reduce how much we are purchasing, and then,
And
climb down the ladder where we see, make sure that, all of these garments that we use don't land up in the landfill, and we put them to best use before, that actually happens.
right.
Uh, and with that, I think we've spoken a lot, but would love to hear from the audience. If there are any questions, please feel free to write in the chat, and we can have Ram answer those as well right now. Any questions, anyone? So we have some time. Ram, okay, we have one question from Namrata. Is sustainable fashion inherently luxury?
No, that's a great question. Uh, Now, I'll challenge this assumption here. Okay, so now let's say you're buying a shirt, right? You're paying, let's say, $15 for the shirt. So you have an anchor price in your mind that if I'm buying a shirt, $15 is the fair price to pay for it. Now, let's say something that's made with organic materials or fair workup policies, it's costing $20. It's like price anchoring has taken place where you feel like $20 is too much for this, right? But the other way to counter this rationale in our minds is, okay, now let's say this garment is made by, let's say, Zara. It lasts me for 5 or 10 washes. I wear this, it lasts me for 50 washes. So per cost wear, and this is something that some of the sustainable fashion brands also use. I think it's called Asket, ASKET, or a bunch of other brands. They use this cost per wear metric, where this will last you much longer. So in the long run, it's actually more economical. And so this is not entirely true that sustainable fashion doesn't have to be in luxury. Uh, the biggest culprit here is like the cheap prices you see. And people are not, and as long as it looks good, again, as I went back a few minutes back when I was talking, like number one thing people look for is the style. Even if it's like really crappy fabric, it'll break in like few washes. Because also, like, if you see, women are also conditioned that after one wash, you just throw it, and like you shouldn't wear a garment more than once or twice. They have this sort of conditioning that goes on. So people feel like they just keep buying. So this takes a slightly different approach where you see that you buy something that will actually last you a long time. For that, I think, again, people's awareness has to really go up. That's the only way that
Absolutely.
but I will say something though. It's a lot easier for a luxury brand to actually follow all the practices of sustainability because their margins are so fat. like because they're manufacturing everything is just a small percentage, so they are a lot. It's a lot easier for them to adopt though.
No, absolutely. So we have another question from Ria. How can consumers differentiate between genuinely sustainable fashion brands and those engaging in greenwashing?
Again, great question, Ria. Thanks a lot for asking this. Uh, uh, Actually, if you don't mind, Ria, are you comfortable like maybe sharing some of the challenge you face, like when you were shopping? Maybe if you're comfortable sharing what kind of garment you were trying to buy. So because it'll vary from because greenwashing shows up in so many different forms. So identifying that also is a bit of a task.
Yeah, I think I read an article and I won't name the brand, but basically it was a conscious collection that they launched, but the conscious
Yes,
part was only the label of the clothing item, and because that was made of recycled materials, but the garment was just a regular
right,
fast
right.
fashion item. So there's so much happening in this space. I think it's very difficult to kind of differentiate um what practice is
Right.
actually
So
accurate, authentic.
no, like as you just said, right? Like a lot of brands like H&M, Zara, a lot of them, right? They have a conscious line, like what you said, and it'll be like if you see from the product line standpoint, it'll be like usually less than 1%, usually. All right. So from that, and then they say we are trying to be more sustainable, and it's not a very fair comment if you ask me. So, like, okay, now how do you differentiate? I think again, going back to whichever garment you're buying, like looking at the certification the government has, and any brand if they are actually doing like anything sustainable and they're doing legally, they'll definitely include the certification. Now let's say you're shopping and this is if you're buying in a retail store, where if you're shopping online, usually if you go on the brand side, they will usually detail out some of the practices they're following on their site. And now no brand, if they're choosing anything sustainable, they'll make sure they're calling it out loud and clear. So uh, no brand is going to like not share any of this. So just reading over their about us, and if something is vague, just write a short message to them. Uh, it'll take under a minute. Like, okay, I'm not very clear. You're saying you're eco-friendly, but I don't see any proofs. Can you share how are you eco-friendly?
Absolutely. But so one is, consumers demanding accountability, but what about like regulatory bodies or, the government? Are they doing anything in this space to sort of ensure that, there are certain regulations in place when you're making such claims?
So I would say that India not it's a lot less. EU, I think there's been a lot of active push. Some are successful, some not so successful. Now there's also like uh, some proposal for like implementing a tax on all these fast fashion, like if it's under a certain price point, because like feasibly, if you're being fair, you will not be able to sell at that price point. And it goes back to previously what Namita was asking, like, is this luxury? Because you are like there is a lot of damage happening when we are choosing to buy that product. And now they're regulators, but again, something to keep in mind, right? Lobbying, like again, a lot of these brands, they have hundreds, like collectively, there are hundreds of billions of, and for them to invest even like $500 million or $1 billion, like to push regulators and like keep them like slow down progress is not very difficult. So there are challenges on that side, but there is EU definitely there's a stronger push. US a lot less, like from the main contributors to fast fashion.
Right. Any other questions? Do we have okay, we have one from Namrata. Even boutique brands, they use better materials that mark up their products so significantly that one can't understand how to do the math to understand if they're just, being overcharged because they're sustainable and claiming that, or is there a way we can judge a fair pricing?
So I'll tell you what I do. Okay, not a lot of people do this, but I went to the flea market and someone was selling this shirt for 3,000 INR, like Indian rupees, so maybe around $40 or so. And usually, you like even an organic like thing could probably get for like $30 or something. So I asked like, hey, why is this like costing? And it's okay to ask them that question also. Like you get an idea of pricing difference. Also, something to note and keep in mind. This boutique brands, I also like I'd advise a lot of these brands. The thing is, they're MOQ, there's all like when you buy from a manufacturer, there's a minimum order quantity. So if you're buying only like say like a very small this thing, you will end up paying 20-30% higher versus what like a large brand might end up paying for the same material. So there itself, there's a thing, and also efficiency wise, a lot of these boutiques are not as efficient. Like they might have one designer who might design for like 3-4 product lines, whereas a bigger brand might have one designer who design for 10 products, like 10 different products. So the unit economics and all, unless you reach a little bit of scale, that pricing and all tends to be a bit of a challenge. So there are multiple challenges like a boutique faces.
Fair enough. But that, I mean, even, and this is something that I also struggle with, like certain brands just price themselves so high just because, they're sustainable, and they make it so luxurious that,
Right.
I'm like, okay, I don't want to be sure. I want to follow sustainability, and I want to
Right.
purchase better materials, and support, the local communities, etc. But I don't
Right.
understand this pricing at all. Like it's actually quite a challenge.
Right. See, the thing is, the way I've kind of formulated in my mind, okay, if it's like say about 1.5 to 2x
Yeah.
uh, higher than the norm. I shop very less, by the way. Just
Right.
maybe 4 or 5 garments a year, very less shopping. Okay,
Oh.
so it's like uh, so I'm okay paying a little higher, and you also feel different. Like when you wear linen, for example, it's much lighter on your body. So I'm okay paying a little more. Uh, but then up to that extent I'm fine, but I'm not okay paying 4x, 5x higher. So that's the boundary I've drawn in my mind, where I've done the math in my head. If I'm a boutique brand, that's a fair price to pay. Now, there's also something to consider, right? Some brands, they want to be positioned as luxury, and luxury works on that. Like you take any of the big luxury brands, right? Uh, uh, it will be 10x higher than what you'll probably cost of making the product. So it's just a marketing strategy. It's a way to people buy that just for that like logo or something. It's
Yeah.
it's more like a signal. You're sending a signal that I am elite or something.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm saying it's fair to be charged 2x, assuming better materials and fair wages have been taken in consideration.
See, the point being that okay, what is the profit margin somebody is making, right? Even if they're charging 2x higher, my point was that it's probably around 10 to 20% profit margin they're making in the entire process.
Mm.
I think that's like a fair enough margin, and it's not like a substantially large margin that they make. If suppose like it's 2-3x, I mean, if suppose they're making like 50 to 100% margin, then I would think twice. Again, this math I was able to figure out because I've worked with sustainable brands, advised them, so I know their the unit economics of where they are. So that judgment I'm able to form that it's actually costing them a lot more, and that's why I'm comfortable paying up to 2x.
So I'll throw another
And
question
I
at
shop very less, by the way. Go ahead.
So, in terms of materials, in terms of sustainable materials, just in terms of material pricing, what is the most expensive and what is the least expensive, some of the materials that you can think of?
See, the cheapest would be recycled polyester,
Right.
but it's again questionable some parts, but it's probably little better than if suppose you need, especially it's more relevant maybe for active wear where still innovations are not there, where people need that sort of thing that only polyester can provide, that comfort factor. And but otherwise, in terms of materials, more expensive would be some of the newer ones like this coconut leather and the other ones that have more recently come out. Uh, Cotton is probably the most widely adopted because again, so much of it is grown, all right, and people are also familiar. It's a familiar fabric,
Yeah.
so people are they know how cotton feels on your body. Hemp is slowly getting more traction, but it's still not there. Bamboo has picked up a lot more traction in the recent past as a fabric. But again, bamboo, there's something called rayon. There's a lot of variations of bamboo, and some of them are more toxic, not some of them not as good. So there's again a lot of variability there. Uh, So that is broad classification. Cheapest would be something like a polyester, and the most expensive would be something like a newer leather fabric, like actual plant-based and not PU. And then, but popular ones still like organic cotton by default,
Correct.
because cotton is the most widely used natural fabric in the world.
Fair enough. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. So Ram, any closing remarks, any thoughts and ideas you'd want to share with us before we tune off?
So I've been in this journey for several years. For me, even now, I still feel like I don't understand everything. And it's constantly evolving space. And like if I forget from EcoVisor and just think purely from a consumer angle, I mean, see, first thought, even when I had to shop and pay higher, right? It pitched me a little bit, but when the reality of comfort level of willing to pay more only came when I started working with these brands and trying to understand what goes on in their practice. And maybe not everyone has the luxury of it, but a simple thing you can do, like just keep aside sustainable brands or anything. Just like from if I am trying to be more sustainable, number one thing I'll try to do is like uh, buy less often and buy only what I feel I need. And by default, because of that, I don't mind paying like $10, $20 extra for buying another garment, because I'm buying it only like a handful of times. And when I'm buying it, I also feel good about my purchase, that uh, blood has not been spilled, or like some agricultural lands have been destroyed because of farming or growing this garment. And this is going to last me a longer time. In fact, I don't know this Patagonia, if you're, I don't know how many might be aware, but there's this campaign that Patagonia ran a few years like back about don't buy. So they basically, it was a very anti-marketing kind of campaign, and it actually helped build a lot of trust with consumers. So because because they said repair your garments, don't buy unless you really need this. But why I gave this example is that start thinking from this angle, like do you really need that object, or otherwise try to use whatever garments more often. It's also, I think, important that we're brainwashed heavily by fashion brands that we need to keep buying every month. So that sort of thing, I think we should just be conscious ourselves, like how are we consuming?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important part of sustainability because, I mean, when I also started my sustainability journey, I think the most important thing to do is open your cupboards and see how many garments are we actually wearing out
Mm.
of what we possess. And you'll realize that most of the times you haven't even worn half your garments in over 3 to 4 months and they're just lying there, and we're continuing to purchase these newer items, which then after you get bored of them, they're just pushed back to your cupboards, and you don't like them anymore. So I think it's very important to change that kind of mindset, that when I go to the mall, I don't necessarily just have to shop to feel good. It's important to buy things very need based, and sure, like these products are a lot more expensive, but certain sustainable brands, but there is that feel good factor to it, where eventually if you're supporting a local business, paying a little bit of premium, but that you've done good rather than harm. So thank you so much, Ram, for coming on today. I think for me personally, it was a very, very insightful session, because I personally have really struggled in this particular space on in my sustainability journey. So thank you for answering all our questions. We will be, putting out a recording of this session on all our social media platforms. If you don't get it, please feel free to, ping us. Any other questions that you have for Ram, please feel free to write into us, and we'll definitely connect you all, or, have your questions answered. It was a great, great session. So please do share it ahead, with everybody, so we can, discuss this problem and make, our community understand problem solving and these solutions and challenges that exist in sustainable fashion. Thank you so much, Ram, for coming on, and for everybody else, please stay tuned for more such sessions. We look forward to building more conversation.
Thanks a lot, Sukriti. Again, really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for all the questions and all your sharing all your insights as well. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.